Pre-trip events by J. Trip events by G. Post-trip thoughts by J. It all started on a Saturday. Me and two others, D and D, all left in the morning to town with the idea of scraping together some money for dextromethorphan. After several hours to no avail, we hit the stage where anything would have done. Let me state that I have done Datura twice before with very heavy results, each time vowing that I would never touch it again. D had knowledge of the whereabouts of some Datura growing right behind some apartments. Once we reached the spot, we pulled out D's bag and pulled 2 plants out and put them in. We then made it back to my house where I had my 2 aunties' house sitting. Sneaking downstairs, we found a portable stove and a pot. We then decided to wait a few hours before cooking and filled time with spots and joints. It then came the time for Chef J to boil what we called shaman juice. I grabbed the 2 plants and one by one pulled leaves of it, about 40 leaves and 3 pods, poured in water and put to boil. After boiling for about half an hour, the brew was ready to be consumed, filling 3 cups of the green liquid. We then proceeded to drink the contents. After that, memory and time flew out the window. This is the recollection from our trip sitter. 7:30 p.m. At this stage, we were all sitting in the various chairs downstairs. Jay had begun to have some trouble walking as he began to roam around downstairs looking for random objects. He had begun to get the giggles and D was starting to get what I call his trip face, so I left the 3 downstairs and went to clean up upstairs. After about 20 minutes, I went back down to check on them and found D and D on the couch with their eyes shut while Jay was sitting on a chair looking into space. I remarked that he smelt like vomit and he proceeded to tell me that he couldn't stand the dry mouth and had vomited in a dishwashing bowl in the corner of the room. He also told me that he choked after vomiting and was rather scared. I told him that I would get his bed ready and come back down to get him after I'd gotten him a clean shirt to wear instead of the vomit-covered one. 8 p.m. I could tell that his awareness of time was shot, as when I went to get him after half an hour he looked up with dilated pupils and said, "Already?" as if it had been 2 minutes. Shortly after he was tucked in bed, the shakes and the sweating began. He was also gasping for breath and his words became jumbled as he told me he couldn't breathe. I lay next to him in bed and told him he was just freaking out and told him to take deep breaths and push against my hand with his stomach to slow him down and give him something to focus on. I had a drink bottle that I gave him water with about every 5 minutes. 8:30 p.m. I went downstairs to check on D and D and both seemed very comfortable on the couch. As I came back upstairs, I noticed that Jay was in the toilet and carried on to get a cigarette. When I came back to his bedroom, he notified me that he couldn't get his zip undone, well, at least that's what I thought he said, and that he had managed to piss himself. Helping him into bed, I pulled off his jeans and boxers and asked him if he wanted some clean ones, to which he replied no and went back to sleep with no pants on. 8:50 p.m. I had the TV on next to Jay so I could keep an eye on his facials and breathing patterns. The first sign of any real tripping was when he sat up, looked at me and did some weird hand movements while making a song tune with kazoo noises. I made him lie down and gave him lots more water. This was the start of the battle of getting fluids into him, as the water tasted yuck at the end of his mouthful. This later came to be that he thought the drink bottle was a massive bottle of candy squeeze and the end of it was watery. Jay then announced he needed to go to the toilet again, so I put some boxers on him that were easy to get undone, haha. I followed him as I was now positive he was tripping balls and running into his aunties, and that state was not a good idea. I became confused as he walked past the toilet to the back door and unlocked it. He then went outside and yelled at me, "Gee, I'll show you what they've done to the grass." I followed him and he began pissing on the grass, and after that seemed normal. He then came back inside and walked into the kitchen where his auntie was standing. She looked at him and claimed he looked out of it, to which he replied, "I know, we were talking about it last night." Just for the record, it was last night still at the time. He then patted her on the shoulder, said thanks and returned to bed. 9:20 p.m. This was when the really bad tripping began. After being asleep for about 3 minutes, he turned to me and said, "So who's going?" "You are," and then laid back down and returned to his closed-eye hallucinations. Occasionally he would sit up, shake his head and do a psychotic laugh that actually made me scared. He then stared, calling me D, and thought that everyone was lying in his bed, which was now 15 meters wide. After repeatedly reassuring that I was G and we were in his bed and D were downstairs, he then lay back down and seemed to relax. He then cuddled me and gave me a kiss before closing his eyes again. 9:45 p.m. Jay then decided to go to the toilet yet again, and I followed him outside. He began pissing in the garden this time, and seemed rather amused by the whole process. He was also talking to some people that weren't there, and I believe he imagined pissing on them. After talking to them for a while, I lead him back inside and told him he needed to get back into bed before he talked to his aunties again. I pushed him in the direction of his room, but he decided he wanted to go out to the lounge and kept walking. I grabbed his arm, but he then pushed me against the wall, giggled like a little girl and ran away like we were playing Tiggy. He looked at me again, screamed, then ran faster into the lounge. He then said, "Andy C, are you still using the internet?" Of course, she wasn't there, but his other auntie, L, replied by saying they had finished with it. She then asked where we were going, and as Jay was rummaging through the cupboards, he replied, "Town." 9:50 p.m. I finally got Jay back into bed and he seemed coherent until he lied down and started knocking on the surrounding objects like a chair and my head. Sometime during this time period he also thought I was E and got scared to wake up from a closed-eye hallucination to find us cuddling. 10 p.m. Jay notified me that he needed to use the shitter, so yet again I followed him but got paranoid when he went into the bathroom that he was going to piss in the shower. Instead he picked up my hairbrush, to which I said, "Didn't you need to go to the toilet, babe?" He looked at me like I was completely stupid and said, "No. I only came in to get the hairbrush." I asked him if he wanted me to brush his hair and he said yes, so we went back to bed and I brushed his hair. He picked up the blanket and proclaimed it was made out of snake skin. 10:20 p.m. After sleeping for 20 or so minutes I woke to see Jay scratching the bed and my clothing. I asked him what he was doing. He then proclaimed that it was all made out of weed. He then waved his hand and asked me to turn the light on. I then got up and flicked the switch. Several minutes afterwards he was sound asleep. I checked his breathing and followed suit. The morning after, from the account of Jay, I woke up next to G with no recollection of anything that happened. I went downstairs to check on E and D. They were both awake. They then told me they hadn't slept and that D was watching the TV all night, the unplugged TV that was facing the opposite direction to where they were, and E told me that she felt sick. They both got picked up and went home. 3 days later I talked to D. He then told me that for 2 days after he was still tripping but currently is okay. In summary, it is something I will never try again. Thank God, says G. But to this day I have a strong interest in what occurs. I believe that Datura provides an insight into the untapped energy that exists in the human brain and is something that one could possibly achieve by means unknown at this present time. I still have a lot of respect for Datura and still believe that we haven't quite yet found a way to use it correctly. But for the time being I plan to take mushrooms for spiritual insight. Thank you for reading. It's October 10th, 2 days before my 15th birthday. My boy Dave comes to school and tells me about this crazy-ass drug he found. He asked me if I've ever heard of Jimson weed seeds. I say no as he proceeds to tell me about his experience with them. He said he ingested one pod, about 100 to 200 seeds. He tells me he was on his way to his best friend's house and he walked into the neighbor's house instead without even noticing. He walked to the fridge and poured a glass of milk, then drank it. Suddenly an old lady walks in and screams, "What are you doing in my house?" He frantically runs out of her house into the right house. Then he tells me he did them the next day and did the exact same thing to the same house. Being the kind of person who will try almost anything once to find out what it does to me, I instantly was interested in trying this drug and asked what they looked like and how many I should do. He said to eat no more than one whole pod. I told 2 of my friends about these things and what they did to Dave. My friend Steve said he heard of them and know where one is growing. Me, Sean and Steve start walking toward where they were. I was a little nervous since I've never heard of this before but was still eager to try them. We picked a single pod off and decided to get our other friend Stooters, Shane, to come along. We sat there and told him about them and he wanted to be the first to try them. So we cut open the pod and he ingested every last beet red seed, chewed, and swallowed. We went back to Stooters' house and about half hour later he slurred the words "I feel a bit drunk" and told us to go eat some. Knowing they were for real and did get you high, we went back to the plant and raided it. We took 3 more pods and each ate one. We decided to walk downtown. About an hour later I felt very hot and uncomfortable. I remember Steve saying he was going home to see his girl. Me, Sean, and Stooters were on Stooters' front porch. Stooters said he was going to be right back. Then I remember waking up on his front porch by myself and it was dark out by now. Confused, I got up and walked home. On the way I kept looking over and seeing all my friends I did them with. I was talking to them and smoking a spliff with them. I turned again and they were gone. I got real confused as to why they kept running off on me. It made me pretty mad too. I don't remember getting home or much after that at all. My mom told me the rest. She said when I got home I looked all fucked up. She said I sat down at the computer table without a single word and started moving my hands as I were rolling a joint, then lit it up and passed it around. I was talking to Sean and Stooters about selling these things, she said. Her and her boyfriend didn't know what to think, so she kept asking me, "What are you on?" And I would say, "Oh nothing mom, I've just been smoking weed and drinking with Sean and Shane, you know, it's my birthday, we're just chillin'." "No you're not," she said, "you're on something harder." And I argued with her, "No, I've just been chillin' with Sean and Shane smoking weed, ask them." She looks at me and yells, "There is no one fucking there." I turned and looked beside me with a confused look on my face and said, "Oh. They'll be right back." She still didn't know what I was on because I simply didn't remember. All I knew was I was chillin' with my friends. She said over the next 7 hours I kept smoking cigarettes that weren't there and thinking I was burning myself. My stepdad stayed up all night on the computer watching me since I wouldn't stay still or sleep. He told me at about 4 in the morning I got up off the couch and walked towards the table. It was pitch black so he couldn't see what I was doing. He said I was moving things around on the table, so he told me to sit back down on the couch, so I did. He noticed I had something in my hands, looking at it, flipping it around, and about 5 minutes later he heard me say, "Is this the fucking lid to the butter?" So he stands up and turns on the light. There I was sitting on the couch with the lid to our glass butter holder. He garbed it and went towards the butter and finds the pillow sitting in the spot where the lid should be, and he laughed his ass off. My parents said they got a huge kick out of me. They said I was like a 10-year-old kid with a 10 seconds memory span. Another incident my mama told me about was that I went to the bathroom and I was in there for like 10 minutes before I came out strutting my stuff buck naked in the hallway. She turned to her boyfriend and asked, "What do I do?" And he said, "I don't know, I'm not touching him." So they told me to get dressed, and it took quite a while for me to come out, and when I did I had my mama's pants around my head, so they had to get me dressed themselves, which I later apologized to them. It was a school night, so my mama said I should stay home while they went to work. In the morning I was still pretty high, but I remember what I did by then. I went to my friend Joe's house and told him all about it, and we decided he wasn't gonna go to school either and he was gonna do some seeds with me. We were gonna sell them to kids and make some money too, so we went to the plant and garbed like 20 pods. We went up to the high school and gave a bunch away, then we ate a pod each on the way to Sean's house to see how he made out last night. We got there and cut open all the pods and put them in baggies. We figured not many people would buy them, so we ate another 3 pods each. The last thing I remember is Studer's aunt coming to Sean's freaking out asking us what he was on and to show her where they are because Studer's was in the hospital bleeding out of his eyes, ears, nose and mouth. I instantly got paranoid since I just ate 4 more pods. I only remember about 10% of the whole time, but Sean wanted to stay sober to see what we do because he didn't remember the night before, which was good because we probably wouldn't be here if he did them too. He first noticed Joe was dripping out because he asked Sean who the lady suntanning in his backyard was. Sean seen there was no one there and said it was his mom's friend. His mom was coming home soon, so he walked up to Joe's house. On the way he said he knew I was high now too because I was chewing on my shirt like it was food. He said I looked at him and with the funniest expression on my face I said to him with my shirt in my hands, "Sausage?" He just laughed and said, "No, it's okay Jamie." When we got to Joe's he was having a hard time watching us since Joe was in his house and I was all over the place, in his backyard, his basement and walking down his street. He came out back once and seen me smoking something and passing it to people who weren't there. He started playing with me a bit asking if he can have some and I was like, "No. You're cut you fucker." He just laughed and went back inside. When he got in there Joe was in his bathroom slicking his hair back with hair gel. Sean didn't say anything to him, just watched to see what he was doing. Joe got out of the bathroom and sat on his couch. He put his arm around someone who wasn't there and with a stud look on his face he asked, "What's going on baby?" Sean told me he actually fell to the ground laughing. The whole time this was going on I had 1 hit of ecstasy that I was saving for my birthday in a dime bag. Sean said he kept asking to see it and make sure I still had it. I pulled it out a few times and showed him, then he said that one time I pulled out the baggie and it was empty. He started getting paranoid and kept saying, "Where's the pill? Where is it?" I had no idea what he was talking about and we still don't know to this day if I ate it or not. About 5 hours of him babysitting us he was getting frustrated and decided to bring me home. He told my mom Shane was in the hospital and she and him brought me there. Joe's dad came home and found him talking to a telephone pole. My mama told Joe's dad to bring him there too. When we got into the car she said I thought we were going to get my contacts, so she didn't tell me we were going to the hospital. When we got there it was around the time when SARS was going around, so we had to get asked all these questions. The nurse asking my mom the questions had no idea I was all fucked up. I garbed at all the bottles that were on the desk and I was trying to drink one of them. My mama tried to grab it from me saying that it was the nurse's and I held it tight yelling, "No it's not, I just made this fucking juice." There were people staring at me by this time and the nurse fetches a doctor. I got brought to this room and on the bed beside me was my friend Joe. Studer's was in intensive care. I vaguely remember this, but I remember some. I remember the doctors and the 3 cops standing in front of me. The doctors gave me 2 cups of charcoal in a paper cup and said I had to drink them or they would have to stick a tube down my throat. Me, having still no idea why I was in the hospital, was kind of thirsty anyway and forgot it was charcoal. I looked down at the 2 cups and I figured it was Pepsi or something, so I chugged the first one then the second one. Instantly I felt a sandy feeling in my throat and was disgusted. Then came 8 cups of see-through liquid and the cop says I have to drink them too. Still mad they fed me pop with sand in it. I refused. I lied back in my chair and tried to look over at my friend Joe, but the curtain was in the way. I whispered to my mom to push my bed back so I could see him, and she said if I drink the cups first. So I did, slowly but surely. I remember how gross it was, but still I did it. They had a clip to my finger and I kept moving my finger towards my other hand. My mama would hold it back and say no, and I was like, I just want to see it, just for a second. So she let me. I was moving my finger slowly towards my hand, then in a fast motion I grabbed it and ripped it off. They put the clip back on and I kept trying. Finally when I gave up I whispered to my mama again. Move back my bed so I can see Joe. So without the doctors noticing she did so. Got to love my mama. I looked over at Joe and I remember seeing the biggest smile on his face as he said, your nose is broken, that's why you're here. And I replied, really? Why are you here, man? And he laughed and said, I broke both of my legs, man. I'll never be able to walk again. And all the cops started laughing at us. I forgot to mention when the cops were trying to get me to drink the stuff, my mom said I was hitting on the lady cop and she was blushing and everything. I laughed when she told me that. But anyway, we got put into our own rooms. When I got out of the hospital, like 6 of my friends told me I called them from the hospital and I don't remember still. One of the nurses found me naked in the elevator trying to escape the hospital. When I got out I was still having major side effects such as blurred vision, lasted over a week, dilated pupils, lasted a few days. For about a month after that every once in a while I would forget to take a breath, then find myself grasping for air. The doctor said we all suffered brain damage and should stay away from all drugs for at least 6 months. Think any of us fucked up kids listened? Hey! Jimson seeds is the only drug I've done that I've said and actually meant that I'll never do them again. They were quite the experience from what I remember, but are no doubt very harmful to my body and very unpredictable, seeing how the levels of poison in the plant varies from year to year and even from leaf to leaf. I know how I think when people say don't do this or even suggest not to. I'm a curious kid and that's why I did them, and I know many more kids will too, so I'll just try to let you know what you're in for. I suggest you don't do them. They are evil, but I know how I am and I know some will. I spent my 15th birthday in the hospital and I'll never forget that. I'm personally glad I did them because I learned a lot. I learned that even when things seem fun they could be fatal. "11 years ago, when I was 16, I was really into drugs. I was smoking pot several times a week, occasionally trying blow, codeine, MDMA, and acid when it came around. By the time I first tried Jimson weed I had already went on a good 20 or so LSD trips. So when Jimson weed was offered to me, I felt confident that I could handle its strong effects, which were said to be a myriad of effects, lasting for 12 to 16 hours. The first few times I took Jimson weed, I only took a quarter pod. The fruit containing the seeds are naturally separated into quarters. I ate the roughly 25 to 30 seeds, and had a good, if slightly weird trip. I remember that unlike LSD, Jimson produced a paranoia seemingly by design. I suppose that by taking only a quarter, the paranoia was mild. I had sloppy motor skills as if I were drunk, a body trip, and mild hallucinations. A wall might wave a little bit, or little things would crawl across flat spaces. But there was always a mild feeling that an ominous force or being was somewhat close. Again, this feeling was mild at the quarter pod dose for me. After taking a quarter pod dose 2 or 3 times, and having not been completely satisfied with this level of trip, I took the recommendation of a friend to up my dose. I ate a half pod, and all the said effects were the same, just with greater intensity. At this dose I did notice an increase in auditory hallucinations. Sounds that I knew, or at least felt confident were real, often changed tone and pitch, much like on LSD, but I also heard very odd things that I knew not to be real. Mostly people speaking to me whom I knew were nowhere near me. This added a little to the general paranoia that accompanies a Jimson weed trip in my experience and in the stories of others who have taken it. However, as with the quarter dose, this was pretty manageable, just a slightly odd, eerie feeling that persisted through much of the trip, which at this dose lasted about 10 hours for me, with maybe a few more hours of bad vision, and a very slight body trip as it worked itself out. Once I took a full pod, easily 100 seeds, all bets were off. Even though I was pretty well versed in strong trips, this was to be a fight for my sanity. I took the full pod dose about 9 p.m. on a Friday night. By around 10:30 or so I started to notice a pleasant, light trip. A tree out front of my friend's yard was growing new branches and sprouting and gyrating before my eyes. A good body trip with light hallucinations lasted for somewhere around 30 to 60 minutes, when I went home and went to sleep. The drug at this dose seems to put me to sleep, although I know of 3 others who took a quarter and felt tired enough to go to sleep, and woke up tripping. I believe I woke up sometime around morning, as I think I remember it being light outside, but I cannot even say this with much accuracy. When I woke up I was tripping very hard. My motor skills were completely damaged, as I could barely stand or walk, and my mind was making fast-paced free association with everything. I would mumble to myself everything that I saw and thought as my mind raced faster than it ever had, faster than my mind could make sense of the ideas it produced. It sounds like the rantings of a madman, as the sentences make no sense, are rapidly said, and have seemingly no fluidity of thought. I also started to experience a hallucinogenic experience I have only been under while on Jimson. Throughout my trip I would be in the conscious world, seeing and hearing distorted things, and many things that weren't there at all. But then, very frequently, I would go catatonic, into a waking dream where whatever happened seemed so real that I could not tell it from reality. I would stay there briefly for maybe a few minutes from what others who were sober were able to help me roughly calculate. As I came from my subconscious state, where whatever I held in my subconscious, things I knew I had been pondering recently, were made into vivid reality, I came back into a conscious trip where I suddenly realized that I was just in a dream state. The frightening thing is that I only realized that the subconscious dream was not real when I came back to my conscious trip, which is still intense. I soon realized even in this state that if I ever got too freaked out, when another subconscious trip hit, the fears held in my subconscious would become my reality. I kept flipping in and out of these states of tripping for a good 16 hours, approximately 8 a.m. when I woke, roughly midnight when I was released from the hospital, nearly sober. When I was in the hospital, my mom found me around 5 p.m. and immediately took me. I heard the whispers of a little boy trapped in a vent. He talked to me throughout the night. I also thought I had telepathy, and can remember hearing one of the doctors saying in his mind that he didn't like me and wanted to beat me. I also read my stepfather's mind. I was given a catheter, please believe me, even on the strongest drugs this hurts, and made to drink charcoal. I believe that I was warned not to be combative, lest I be taken to the psyche ward, though this too could have been auditory hallucination. All in all, it was a very frightening experience, as I began to dread the subconscious trip that was always around the corner. I estimate that it occurred roughly every 5 to 30 minutes, at very uneven intervals, naturally, based on what I have seen and heard. I can't say that I recommend Jimson to anyone. I had a friend act like I did when I took one pod, and he only took a quarter. I have also had a friend who took a whole pod who was naked collecting lint balls off his kitchen floor. It is so unpredictable in its strength from pod to pod, plant to plant, and of course, user to user. I would seriously recommend never trying this drug in any dosage. The entree. 25 finely chewed seeds of Datura stramonium, aged to racemize the hyoscyamine to atropine and the scopolamine to atropine. Each seed is roughly 7 to 8 milligrams, but alkaloid content of each seed varies too much to be consistent. 2 bowls of blueberry kush, cured to decarboxylate the THCA, and smoked approximately 2 hours after ingestion of the Datura. I eye the small cluster of black, teardrop-shaped seeds in the palm of my hand with a mix of apprehension and usual pre-trip anxiety. They taste bitter with a hint of an earthy bite, not bad by any means, but the hard husks get stuck in my teeth. I chew well and let the mass sit in my mouth for a few minutes to aid any sublingual absorption, and prepare to joyously delve into the bowels of torment and despair. The trip. Eyes closed, pitch blackness. A sense of evil, a seductively malevolent vibe. Apprehension as the gears of my perspective slowly creak into the lower planes. Streaking spirals of light, growing brighter and brighter until, suddenly, breakthrough. People and landscapes in perfect clarity as if I were watching through an invisible camera. A man turns towards his wife before stabbing her violently in the back. He rips the peeling flesh from her body as insects suddenly pour out. Cut. A pool of blood, undulating with red waves. Body parts falling in, silently splashing. No sound whatsoever to these visions. Cut. A wolf, black eyes, digging into an unidentifiable corpse. Strings of meat are dangling between its teeth. Cut. Many scenes of erotica, usually ending in gory climax. My skull is but a padded cell, the walls of which my inner demons bounce off. Themes of sadomasochism, violence punctuated by guilty pleasure. I hear sounds of sheer chaos. Screams, thumbs, dragging noises. Someone calling my name, louder, and louder. A gentle hiss and a bump. Cut. Spiders. Lots of spiders, pouring through the cracks of reality as if puncturing through this thin veil of ordinary life. I feel things gently running over my body. I don't open my eyes. Cut. Swinging bodies on nooses, burning. Fire, blood dripping as maggots squirm into the quivering flesh. I am carrying on a conversation with something, but I do not know what. My mind echoes with distorted fragments of meaning, snippets of grand truth ripped from this primeval chaos. Lots of blood. Death. Churning corpses being flayed. Rotating scenes of razor-sharp blades dissecting through my mind. I contemplate the nature of fear in all its manifestations. Here there is true, unmitigated terror. A woman reaches back and rips the top part of her skull off, a horde of black moths flies out. I hear the whispering voices of angels. Cut. I lift my eyelids and stare into the darkness of my room to find relief from the torrential deluge of demonic imagery. My wall is covered with crawling black things. Posters in my pull-up bar, dimly seen in the non-existent light, are bending at absurd angles and then popping back to their rightful shape. Swarms of gnats have infested my room, making the darkness heavier with their presence. The wall shudders as its cracks begin to disgorge countless more denizens of the shadows. I have welcomed in the eldritch beasties of the night, and I'm here to pay them homage. I close my eyes again, and sink further into the welcome depths of hell itself. The aftermath. From the intense effects that I was experiencing, including open-eyed visuals, auditory hallucinations, and a quite intense mental trip, I expected that I had ingested too much of the tropane alkaloids and that I would undergo the typical 3-day delirium that comes with an overdose. However, I woke up the next morning feeling nothing but refreshed and revived with fresh exhilaration. There was also no anticholinergic loss of cognitive faculties during the experience, which I usually feel under high doses of diphenhydramine and the like. My best guess is that marijuana synergizes wonderfully with the Datura plant. In India, the combination of smoking Datura needle with cannabis is supposed to unify Shiva, the male spirit, with Shakti, the female spirit, and that this combination allowed me to experience a form of divinatory visions and open-eye deliria without being overly toxic or long-lasting. I would not recommend this combination to anyone without first starting at low doses of 1 or 2 seeds and working your way up gradually with much time in between the doses. Datura is known to stress the cardiovascular system, and the combination with marijuana can put a great toll on the heart. Combined carefully and with low amounts. Silent meditation in the dark is good for best results, but I've also been able to use stramonium before sleep for lucid dreaming purposes. Typically the trips manifest with an air of seductive evil, bloodshed, and death to them, things that I greatly enjoy as an alternative to the cliched puppies and flowers atmosphere of most traditional psychedelics. Tread the tropane waters carefully. Here there be demons. This is an honest detailed report of my date with that hot piece of ass Datura. After looking all over the net for locations of Datura in my town and finding nothing, I turned to eBay and found exactly what I was looking for. It was really cheap too. Today is the day after my trip and I am slowly recovering from Datura's grasp. I tried to keep a detailed log of my experience, but towards the end of the log it becomes quite unreadable. 5:00 p.m. I have made the tea mixed with Lipton's tea and am going to gulp it down as fast as possible. Note, it tastes just like Lipton tea, but my gag reflexes are trying to prevent ingestion. I find this a little odd considering I like Lipton's tea. I feel a little anxious and scared at the same time. 6:00 p.m. Physical intoxication, not like alcohol, more like taking 10 hydrocodones at once, accompanied by heavy limbs and a slight blur of vision. My face feels like it's heavy and I am noticing that I have to make a better effort to speak so people can hear me clearly. I am starting to feel the need to smoke cigarettes more often than usual. I'm not exhibiting any signs of cotton mouth or disorientation. Decided to watch a movie. 8:00 p.m. Mildly disoriented. Forgot to post an entry for 7 p.m. because I became so engrossed in wandering the house and smoking every 15 minutes. At this point, I can barely read what I am entering here in the log. I feel euphoric and my limbs grow heavier by the hour. I constantly feel as though I have something in my hands which are empty. 8:43 p.m. No hallucinations yet. I feel like I'm being watched. Auditory hallucinations have started and are creeping me the fuck out. I am hearing babies crying and other sounds that I can't make out. Feeling really disappointed that I'm not visually hallucinating. 8:57 p.m. Can't pee anymore. I'm seeing flashes of light outside in the dark and the voices have gotten louder. I'm also starting to see lots of bugs, but they disappear when I reach for them. I went to roll a cigarette, then left the paper in the can and decided to have a pre-rolled cigarette. The next morning I would find that the paper I was going to use for the rolled cigarette was a figment of my imagination. 9:30 p.m. I am feeling weird tremor-like sensations all over my body. I feel kind of sick to my stomach, but not enough to even classify it as a stomach ache. Going to go have a cigarette. Waves of confusion wash over me about every 5 minutes. Feeling lonely and bored as fuck. This is where the log becomes literally unreadable. There is a significant time gap between my last recorded cigarette and the time the clock said when I decided to go to sleep. After my last smoke I came in and the clock read 4 o'clock a.m., which makes me worry about what I was doing in the time gap, considering I went out for that cigarette at 9:30 p.m. I don't remember anything until 4 o'clock a.m. that morning when I found myself getting ready for bed. I thought I saw some Datura seeds on the floor, so I decided to pick them up, but it turned out to be so hard I gave up. Note: never once did I see my cigarette vanish or disintegrate in my hands, nor did my speech become completely inaudible. I tried my hardest to fall asleep, but I had a very hard time getting comfortable. Each time I was about to sleep, my sister, who never really did this, kept coming into my room and asking me questions. I would answer with a what due to my fan being so loud it was hard to make out word for word what she was saying. I would also wake to find millions of ants crawling all over my body, and I would just brush them away and continue to try to sleep. I forgot that I was in my own room and believed that I took my fan into the living room and slept out there. When I actually got up for the day I felt fine, but my eyes were still dilated and anything moving in front of me had tracers. I am starting to have memories of what happened in the time gap, but only glimpses that don't make sense. I didn't enjoy Datura as much as I thought. I was disappointed because I felt trapped in my own world, my everyday life. There were no science fiction themed hallucinations, no crazy off-the-wall happenings. It was just me alone and bored. Not even the voices could change that feeling, nor could the Datura fabricated conversations I had with my sister. I can't envision myself ingesting Datura again, but it would be interesting to me on a scientific level to watch others ingest and observe them from a sober point of view. "3 days ago I tried 3 flowers with no innards in a tea. This was interesting. Reality was reasonably easy to warp, directly or indirectly. My house was a stable environment. I had no sober sitter. A clever man would have had a ground check ready, but, then again, I think I was able to control myself. Now this was a medium dose. This incurred side effects such as blurred vision, spatial reality, dryness of mouth and not being able to use your muscles like you normally would. I think this is attributable to the holistic properties of this sacred flower. Possibly similar to partial astral traveling. I'm not quite there, but still able to feel above numbness. Then experiences the next day, feeling gravity's pull and thinking this body is a restriction. 2 days later. It was going to be a week later, but I got bored and impatient, not working anymore. So I thought I'd pay the neighbor's Datura bush another visit. To prepare, I lit candles and incenses for a sanctified space. I boiled the 4 flowers, stem bits and a couple of small leaves until it was reasonably reduced from almost a full medium-sized pot of water. I drank it in 3 cups to let my body familiarize itself with the substance. To me it is quite pleasant tasting. The flowers go a bit slimy in the water. Then I ate an apple, meditated on the candles, waiting for the plant's pure form to set in. The onset was gradual. Like I would think I see people or wormholes or whatever in my peripheral vision, but when looked at directly they disappeared. At one stage my 2 cats were wandering around to get their food, and every time I looked to pat them they would somewhat be deflated, flat, or grossly disfigured, but somehow still breathing and alive. Lucius, my kitten, turned stiff and into some kind of reptilian baby. For a moment I thought he was dead, but soon after second thoughts came and I brought myself back to the ground, knowing what my mind created and what the beautiful psychotropic plant was seasoning my evening with. I dropped a glass somewhere along the line and cleaned it up somewhere along the line, not without stepping through it a few times. I'd look at tea towel on the ground and it would make a face at me, turn away, look again, and the face would change from happy nice, naughty, mean, deathly etc. I would ask the towel questions and it would respond with a facial expression. This also happened in a similar way with the cats on dead corpses. I also went for a trip outside somewhere. I think it was a friend's place 6 kilometers away. I don't remember how I got there. I think I walked, but stark naked or with just a leather jacket. There was a party going on there and nobody seemed to mind I was naked. I think it was obvious that I was tripping, of which this friendly group of people were familiar with. Then the memories of jumping over tin roof sheeting, very loud, and stepping in really slimy grass/mud/feces while regular visits to my body of mole crickets/leeches trying to eat me. I was not too sure of my exact location, still naked, from memory anyway. I said goodbye about 5 times thinking I lost my bag, so I searched and searched and searched. Not really sure what was reality, but I made as much sense of it as I could. These realms are as real to me as this physical life we lead, both start and end in the consciousness. Getting home. Again I must have walked. I get home sporting my favorite leather jacket, emphasis. I then trundled around my commune home backyard, 4 houses, 1 block of land, lots of hippies. Finding my way to the house, I think my front door is locked. I lose the spare key in between cracks in the bricks. I didn't have mine because it was apparently in my bag which I couldn't find. Seemed to remember seeing it next to a car on the road out the front and then going to get it and finding nothing. Now, thinking thievery has manifested in my realm. So I search for the key I lost in the bricks. No success, just a bunch of other keys that had no physical use. Someone even came along and told me they put a padlock on the door, house works. Quite furious I look inside the door to see a padlock and not 1 but 2 deadlocks, normally only 1. Something to note, it was really hard to get things off the ground. I think maybe a lot of what I saw was based on thought structures in my head that were so similar to real things in my life, just a little twisted. Either I couldn't pick it up, like a 2D object inseparable from the floor, or the object would fade and dissipate into the space as I waved my hand through it. I remembered, thought I did, that my bag was on the chair inside, so I go around the house and find I didn't lock my bedroom window. I climb in. I'm in. This was big for me because I was very chilly. I comforted myself with the ultimatum thought of a hot shower. I found my bag next to the couch I was lazing on previously. I sat. Then I started seeing people. Not only faces and things and common faces at that, but real people. I knew everyone that appeared to me. The first couple I approached to speak with. They froze on the spot, with a look that explained, "I'm sorry." Then others appeared, I spoke to them, they froze too. Then I figured something odd was happening. Everyone I spoke to froze. Me. Don't tell me you're going to freeze as well. Come on, don't do that, almost losing. Then I figured I had an amazing ability to make time freeze. This was quite astronomical. I forced an answer out of a couple of people which they muttered, yes, no or maybe. The cats weren't affected. As well as having conversation with them, they were eating and drinking at their bowls. Guess who was eating with them? Wild zucchini with legs, arms and a face, of course. This obscene creation caught my eye a few times, but I was happy to let it graze with the master. Cats caught mouse, me proud. Then I was hell-bent on seeing an entity. By this time everyone had left. I focused on the floor air and deciphered a shape and form. Now, knowing something was with me, I wanted to speak to it. I got my handmade pendulum charts and pendulum out. Every time I went to pick up the pendulum it would dissipate and leave a mark on the couch from where it was. I searched for it and found it and lost it a few more times like this, so I gave up and thought this isn't what I should be doing. Then I forgave myself for listening to the justifications in my head. At some stage we have a beehive in one of our walls, popped into this realm. I followed its fascinating journey to the light bulb. Very trippy. He or she then flew near me and stung me where my crown chakra should be. I got the stinger out, but seeing there is no swelling this morning, it may have all been my mind's creation. I got to bed eventually, partially cleaned up the broken glass, of which people were walking around, feeling like I should clean it up before my housemate gets back. She's in Tasmania for 2 weeks. My housemate was one of the people there. I would start talking to her, look at her and get little answers for my working questions. Look away, look back. She is now part of the couch, her face embedded in the lining but still able to converse with me. From then, whenever I decided people should freeze, I just had to look at them in the eye and only say a few words, then smirking at me. One other thing I experienced was clairaudience. Any consistent sound, like a fridge or scraping of paper, was manipulated to create voices, yelling children, happy moments shared, possibly whoever this house has held before. It's like they don't have energy like us to make sounds, but they do have the energy to fluctuate consistency from sounds to form what we know of as hearing physically. Bed. Sleep. Fantastic dreamer age. One of which this rather sternly built African/American was dressed in a huge hairspray container as part of bath edge for a product's commercial. Memories of more dreams will pop up later in my day. Sleep. Sleep. These are not definitive but just some awareness of what you might be in for. This is the morning after, my eyes are blurred for near objects and I'm still seeing wisps of swift, graceful energy in my peripheral vision. Overall, I enjoyed myself immensely. No, not for all, as I am told, but fantastically unique just the same.
I feel the need to contribute my experience for 1, the knowledge of others, and 2, to better understand my experience with Datura, which occurred about 4 days ago. I pretty much broke every rule regarding Datura when I decided to try it. It was my first hallucinogenic experience. I would say I ingested it with no knowledge of how much I should take, but it's hardly possible to know exactly how much is dangerous. My experience wasn't horrible. Looking back, I would try Datura again, but for reasons I can't understand, especially because of how dangerous it is. My experience happened at my college. The setting where I first take the seeds is in my friend's dorm room. My sitter counted the bag of Datura inoxia seeds, which turned out to be 130. To be careful, I decided I'd eat 10 of them raw first and see what happened. The taste wasn't bothersome at all. This was at about 11 p.m. It was irritating to have my sitter ask me every 5 minutes if I was feeling anything, and, what if I ate just 2 of them? Do you think it would do anything? After about 2 hours no noticeable change had occurred. I then decided I'd make a tea with some of the seeds. I did that, mixed it with some pomegranate tea, drank the liquid and then ingested the seeds at the bottom of the cup. It tasted normal. I waited, and although I sort of knew that it could take a while for any effects to kick in, I got impatient. I ended up eating all 130 of the seeds. This was probably at about 2 a.m. The next thing I remember is my sitter turning the light off and watching a movie on her computer in the bed across the room. I was in her roommate's bed, as her roommate was gone. My friend is done with the movie and decides to go to bed. At this point I was incredibly exhausted, and all I wanted to do was sleep. I tossed and turned for quite a long time. I really don't remember if I ever fell asleep in that bed, but I probably didn't because I remember having the biggest urge to go back to my own room. I took my laptop and went back to my room where I fell asleep, I'm assuming I fell asleep, and woke up the next morning. I don't even know how to begin to explain what was going on when I woke up. I remember looking at a poster next to my bed of my favorite guitarist and feeling like he was staring and laughing at me. I think I was amused by this. Everything seemed real, but at the same time, surreal. I got out of my bed and proceeded to get dressed, but I knocked down my roommate's guitar about 3 times and consequently woke her up as well. I apologized every time. My motor skills were gone. The next thing I remember is looking in the mirror, which one can imagine as being an insane experience. I remember seeing myself in the mirror, that is, in retrospective, I can see myself in the mirror. But at the time, I thought it was my friend Alyssa. There really is no way to describe what I believe to be happening. I was also talking to her because I really thought that she was in the room, along with other people, except I don't remember who the other people were. What's strange is that when I was on Datura, I really did believe that the people who I was talking to were there, but I specifically remember getting scared and asking my roommate if Alyssa was actually in the room. I would then not see my friends anymore, only to have them return at other times. This happened several times throughout my experience. The next part of my experience is the gap that I can't really remember. After I woke up and got dressed, I walked down to the dining hall. As I was walking down the stairs outside of my dorm, I saw my friend sitting in the grass on a hill. There is no reason why my friend would be sitting in tall grass doing nothing, but nonetheless, I thought she was. I called out to her several times, turned around and started walking, but when I looked back she was gone. I then started talking to a lamppost and asked it if it knew where my friend was, when an actual person started walking towards me. I asked them as well, but they didn't answer and looked at me like I was crazy. There are no lampposts where I was walking, I now realize. It was Parents' Weekend, so all the faculty and professors were there. I then remember sitting outside of the dining hall and talking to one of my professors, which makes me scared to go to class every day. My friend that was with me said I was coherent during that conversation, but during every other conversation I was speaking gibberish. Since then, every time I'm in the dining hall I'm paranoid. Nonetheless, I don't remember what happened in the dining hall or who I talked to. I don't really remember the rest of that afternoon. My friends tell me that someone brought me to their room saying that I had no idea where I was or what I was doing, but I don't remember seeing that person. I must have then fallen asleep because I remember waking up, smoking a cigarette, and having it disappear. I thought that I kept dropping them. It was so distressful looking for cigarettes that didn't exist. When I woke up I also started talking to my friend online. I have the conversation saved. It was at 3:45 p.m. I told her all about my experience and I was completely coherent. When I say coherent, I mean what I was saying was understandable but not necessarily grammatically correct. Me, yeah, I smoked cigarettes that didn't even exist, and I was surprised that they just vanished, and I had lots of conversations with people I know but they weren't anymore near me. The weird part is, during the conversation I also remember talking to her on the phone, only to look at my hand and realize that the phone wasn't there. Like the cigarettes. Even now I don't understand how I could talk to some people normally and be completely delirious 2 minutes later. There's so much more to the experience that I can't possibly explain to anyone. I know that most people who try Datura don't want to do it again, but I'm so fascinated with Datura that I can't say that I'll never do it again. When I tell my friends that I'm thinking about doing it a second time, they always tell me that I wasn't happy when I was tripping. It bothers me when people ask me to get some for them. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I did read about it for a month and I think I pretty much got lucky. I think they get the impression from my experience that it was fun, like acid, but it's not. It's just delirious. I don't know the right word to describe how I felt or feel about the experience. I'm glad it happened. I didn't enjoy it, it wasn't fun, but I feel a strong connection with Datura. I even pinned a bag of seeds with the label on it next to the poster near my bed. The after effects included not being able to read anything relatively close to my face, my eyes just couldn't focus, a rapid heartbeat, and overall depersonalization. I remember feeling nauseous the night after I was done tripping and going to the bathroom, only to get scared of being in the bathroom alone and leaving immediately. I also rushed to my friend's room to check my heart rate, which I thought to be abnormally fast. I didn't talk much in the days afterwards. I'm back to normal now, but for some reason I'm avoiding people that had a negative effect on my life now that the experience is over. When the after effects were present, I was constantly scared that they would never go away and that I'd be diagnosed with HPPD. Although my experience wasn't a train wreck, I discourage people from thinking that Datura will be a fun trip or just another drug that they can get fucked up on. I tried Datura because I felt ready for my first hallucinogenic experience and because something told me that everything was going to be okay. Before Datura, I've always been scared to venture outside my mind with hallucinogens. Different Datura plants have different potencies. I ate 130 seeds and nothing went seriously wrong, whereas I have read of people eating 15 and being in serious physical trouble. Datura was relatively good to me. That doesn't mean it's good to everyone.
A friend of mine, who turned me on to all my psychedelic experiences, had been researching Datura and had just recently, a few days prior, found some plants growing on the Canadian River in central Oklahoma. I'm not quite sure what strain this was, but what he had were thick oval pods with soft spikes all around, opened up to reveal small seeds. He invited me to experiment with him, and was very explicit in telling me it was a dangerous beast and not a lot was known about it. Intriguing. I couldn't resist. The first few times we tried it, we took a very small dosage, maybe 5 seeds apiece, and felt no effects. A week later, we tried again with a larger dose, 15 seeds apiece. This resulted in blurry vision, small amount of dizziness, and both of us falling asleep 2 or 3 hours after ingestion, but no noticeable effects otherwise. It was kind of scary, and we decided to write this one off. Looking back, I don't know why we would want to try again after that experience. But a month or so later, we ran across another plant in the same area as the first, and grabbed a pot apiece, went home and ate all the seeds. We were careful to meticulously chew the seeds up this time, and it seemed to help. A few hours after ingestion, we both passed out. We did not fall asleep. We passed out, it was involuntary. He awoke before me, don't know how long we were out, and shook me until I was awake. I could not walk. My legs felt strong, but I could not keep my balance. It was as if the weight of my body kept shifting from one side to the other and I felt very top-heavy. My eyes were also extremely light-sensitive. The sun coming through the blinds in his house looked like solid laser beams. When I closed my eyes, I thought I remembered seeing little men, like the Silver Surfer, but smaller, riding on these laser beams of light coming in through the window. But when I opened my eyes, the vision was gone. My friend later told me that he could not focus on anything, but had no hallucinations. At this point in the trip, I felt a strong urge to be home, so I took off walking. How I managed to get across town, on foot, in my balance-deprived and semi-delirious state will always be a mystery to me. But I did make it home. By this point, I was hallucinating very heavily, still not able to walk well, but it was not alarming. I was not consciously thinking, it's okay, I'm tripping, rather it just seemed natural that the world should appear to me in this form. My roommate came home, and he had been in on our earlier experiments with Datura, so I told him what was happening. He sat with me for a while, then went to bed. He later said that while he was awake and with me, I was sitting on the couch staring straight ahead. My eyes would open and close for long periods of time, and I would sometimes mutter intelligible things under my breath. This is when I started to truly slip into the delusional state. I recall seeing and talking to friends from high school, whom I had not seen in years. I even recall being able to bring more people into the conversation at will. I brought my friend whom I had started this trip with over as well, so he could see this. I was having sort of a party with old acquaintances. The conversation was very trivial, how have you been, remember when we did this or that, are you still with what's her name, type of stuff. I remember having direct conversations with people, while hearing other people in the background having totally unrelated conversations. Such was the clarity of the hallucination. Sometimes the person I was talking to would just disappear in front of my eyes, but this seemed natural, as in oh, they left. It was totally different from an acid hallucination where I have to remind myself that I am tripping. The sudden spark of fear, oh my god I'm losing it, was never present. My roommate was awakened a few times by my talking and he heard me open the front door numerous times and say hello and see you later to people. He said that once he came to check on me and I was talking so fast that he couldn't understand me, and I was drinking a beer. I don't remember that part. He asked me who all I was talking to, and I told them he could see them if he just looked. He said he didn't see anyone, and I told him to close his eyes and try to see them. He went back to bed. I don't remember much else, except for constantly thinking I was smoking non-existent cigarettes. I would think I had one in my hands, even be taking drags off of them, and then my two fingers would touch together and I'd think I had dropped it. I probably spent 3 hours of this trip crawling around on the floor looking for dropped cigarettes. I found out years later that this is a very common appearance in Datura trips. I was drinking a lot of water during the trip, and apparently beer as well, due to an extremely dry mouth and throat. Still, urination was infrequent and very difficult. I later slipped into more of a stupor. The strong hallucinations subsided and I wanted to do something but was lacking the motor skills and mental acuity to accomplish much. Music didn't seem to be very enticing. During acid trips music was usually the cornerstone of the experience for me. I tried to play with a fractal program on my roommate's PC, but had trouble remembering how to use the mouse properly. I tried reading a book, but my eyesight was too far gone to focus on the letters, and my mind was too far gone to comprehend their meaning even if I could. 12 hours and one long bath later, I started coming back to Earth. To the best of my ability, I figure the active trip lasted around 24 to 30 hours. The next day, I felt very tired, distant, and depressed all day. My vision was very blurry for a week, and not sharp as normal for more than 1 month after the trip. The mild depression stayed with me for a few months, and eventually led to me taking a cycle of Zoloft. I never suffered depression before or since. The long-lasting after effects had me very worried. For a long time, at least a year, after this trip, I would occasionally see something rushing towards me out of the corner of my eye, only to be startled and realize nothing was there. I also had, for many years after, a slight speech impediment, occasional trouble getting sentences to start, sort of like a mild form of stuttering. This still happens today from time to time, and I took the Datura over 8 years ago. Maybe it's related and maybe not, but it never happened to me prior to the Datura trip. In summation, it was not what I would call a good trip, but not exceedingly bad either. It was the only drug I have ever taken that provided true audible/visual/tactile hallucinations, and that was quite an experience to behold. But it was also a spiritually empty trip. Other than remembering the hallucinations, I didn't bring anything back with me, nor did I have the mental acuity to do much soul-searching. I have been taken down to zero before on acid, but still achieved a positive experience in analyzing and rebuilding my psyche. This was different. It was more like I was distracted by amusing hallucinations while some demons attached my psyche to a toffee puller. The work afterwards was more of a repair than a rebuild. I would not recommend this drug to anyone. In short, be careful out there. Just a few days ago, August 2, 2007, 2 friends and I first spotted and identified sacred Datura, as the Navajo call it, in Canyon de Chelly. Our Navajo guide explained that it gets you high, man. So we decided to delve deeper into this mystical plant that blooms only at night. We left the canyon without the plant in hand, wondering if we'd ever find it again. Only days later, as we entered Zion National Park, we saw the plant growing in abundance there. There was so much that every day the shuttle bus driver would explain what it was, going on to say it was poisonous to touch or eat. Of course we knew better. That Tuesday after hiking Angel's Landing, we decided to take this plant as a tea and see what it was all about. At first the trip reports scared us, almost not into taking it. Still we embarked on our journey, steeping 1 large flower and 1 leaf in a concoction of lemon, ginger and orange for taste. The brew was surprisingly good and the 3 of us drank from it equally. Not too long after, I began feeling a little strange. Not bad strange, but I could tell that the world around me seemed to take on new life. I became energized with a happy, carefree mood, smiling often and simply enjoying the situation. My friend Ray soon began to feel similar effects, and we would share these same feelings throughout the trip. Our other psychonaut, Zach, had taken Brugmansia before, and for the large duration of the trip supposedly felt nothing more than a sore throat. The 3 of us experienced increasingly worse cottonmouth. It got to a point when our throats were sore, as if we were just getting over a cold. After about 35 minutes we were feeling the intensity of the trip building. We simply laid in the nice green grass, under the shade of the Cottonwoods, in an amphitheater of red rock cliffs towering thousands of feet overhead. Ray and I were feeling an intense head and body high, almost a feeling of carefree drunkenness, with a sort of weightless sensation. We laid in our spot beneath the trees and soon a group of about 5 girls and a guy sat near us. We talked about them for a while before talking with them. Eventually one of them asked about our drink, as we had begun making a stronger Datura tea yet again, to bring back home. We explained it to them and they began asking if we were high. So we explained to them about ganja and various other substances we have experimented with in the past. At this point we were at the peak of the experience, talking with what ended up to be a large amount of really hot New York chicks. 2 of them came up to Ray and I and started talking Chinese gibberish bullshit. This really tripped us out. We all remember it, but Datura is a funny thing. It can make me see or hear things and think they are completely real. To this day we don't really know if this actually happened or if we were just tripping balls. We eventually had to say goodbye to our guests and simply laid there doing what we were before. Time seemed to not even really exist anymore, or it was like we were separate from time, no longer connected to that strange idea. We felt independent from everything, and at the same time, so completely connected to every natural thing about the earth. We felt in tune with the earth and all its beings. Man-made things took on a strange awe. The leaves above us began twinkling like diamonds. Every time the wind would blow I would get the chills. My body felt a little warmer than normal and even the warm Utah breeze felt cold. Our trip lasted a good few hours in its peak, and seemed to last all day. We just felt a little bit different all day long and even into the next few days. The Datura seemed to affect us mostly in a spiritual way. Forever after we seemed to be able to connect with the earth and all its creatures more securely. We felt as if we were a part of some sort of universal family every time we took a look around. Just last night I smoked a thing called a beedi. I guess this is Datura wrapped in a beedi leaf and looks something like a joint made out of a leaf. It had a surprisingly good taste and a great effect. This time Zach tripped out a bit. We had that same carefree feeling but also so unbelievably happy. As we walked down the beach we just began screaming whatever came to mind. We were a little bit stoned as well, but the Datura had obvious effects. Overall I think Datura was amazing, at least for me. I've heard numerous very scary reports and I'm happy to say that my experience was much on the contrary. I am very experienced and very spiritual and I think that's why it unlocked that aspect of my personality. Datura was used by the medicine men of the Southwest to experience intense supernatural experiences which would give them wisdom to speak to the people. I experienced something of the like, and I think it is because I was prepared for it. Revisiting this experience is somewhat difficult for me. The few hours I remember are some of the most frightening and potentially deadly I've ever had the displeasure of experiencing. I was 17 and rebellious. I grew up in a very conservative wealthy family and by my early teens I found myself experimenting with pot, mostly out of my desperation for friends. By the time I was 17 I was regularly getting stoned and loving this new world I'd discovered. I was meeting people and spending time in places that my parents would have died had they ever found out about and I loved it. I loved the independence. I loved thinking I knew better. By the time I was about 17 the same group of friends that introduced me to pot had started talking about this thing called moonflower. Desperate to prove myself to these older cooler guys I told them I'd love to try it and we went on a search throughout the town to hopefully find some growing. We found a plant and took a few pods to one of the guys' home. I don't remember how much I took that night but it wasn't much. I remember going home pretty soon after and coaxing myself into thinking I was starting to trip out. I'd never done anything but smoke weed so I didn't know what this was even supposed to do but the little information they had given me led me to believe it was some kind of hallucinogen. That's literally all I knew about it. After that failed night a few months had gone by and I found myself at the local lake with some friends hanging out on the beach. I noticed some gigantic moonflower plants growing nearby and upon closer inspection, I noticed that there were several huge spiny pods growing all around it. I picked 4 or 5 of the biggest ones and headed home. They looked kind of cool so I lined them on top of the TV in my room and kind of forgot about them. A couple days later my entire family came down with their wives and children. I'm the youngest. We're a pretty close family so we spent the day hanging out and just having a good time. Little did I know what was coming that night. It was about 3 in the morning and I was bored with nothing to do. I'd spent all the time I could on the computer and there was nothing on TV but I soon remembered the spiny pod sitting on top of my television. I was in a pretty daring mood and I didn't want another false start so I took 2 of the pods upstairs with me and cut them open in the kitchen. I completely emptied out the contents of both pods and poured a glass of my favorite juice then proceeded to pour the contents into my mouth where I chewed them up to a pulp and swallowed the mush with a few gulps of fruit juice. It's been 6 years since that night but as I sit here and remember it I'm actually gagging as I think about it. I sat in the kitchen for a few minutes then remember walking downstairs into my bedroom. I sat on the bed waiting for something to happen and after 10 minutes or so had passed I started thinking it must have been another dead pod. I sat up to walk into the bathroom and as I got up I noticed a strong sense of dizziness come over me. It's working. I remember thinking. I walked into the bathroom with a really strong urge to urinate but as I stood over the toilet I noticed that I couldn't go. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't start to pee. By this time the effects were almost doubling every minute or so and my mind was becoming more and more cloudy. I had to pee so bad and I remembered that every time I get into hot water I had a hard time not going so hey, why not turn on the outside jacuzzi? Genius idea I thought. I started walking out of the bathroom and as I caught my reflection on the way out I stopped and stood there staring at myself. Not recognizing the person looking back at me. I sat there moving my face around and feeling it with my hand as the effects came washing over me faster and faster. I'd never felt anything like this before and I was kind of liking it. By this time I had started to teleport around the house. I have absolutely no memory of walking around, I just remember appearing in different rooms. I opened my eyes and I was in my bedroom looking into the mirror, getting more and more confused about who was looking back at me. I teleported to the jacuzzi controls and turned it on. The jacuzzi takes a good 20 minutes to heat up but I just remember suddenly being in my swimsuit and trying to walk outside to get into the warm jacuzzi. I remember having the hardest time trying to lift my legs to walk by now. I got to the edge of the jacuzzi which is about a 1-foot high ledge to step over and I thought I was lifting my leg high enough to step over the ledge but as I went to take my step I noticed my foot was only a few inches from the ground. I tried again and the same result. I bent down and lifted my leg up with my hands and suddenly I was sitting down in the warm water. I was finally able to urinate and I was just sitting there in a complete daze. This is where I started to pass in and out of consciousness. The best way to explain it is to say it's exactly like when someone holds my neck and passes me out and I start coming back from it. I get this weird static noise in the background like from a television that slowly fades away and I'm back to normal again. This started happening over and over again. It was even stranger because the noise of the water and jets mixed in with the static and all blend together. This is the scariest part. I'll give a brief explanation of the outlay of our backyard to better convey the situation. Basically, the pool and jacuzzi sit about 25 feet away from the house and the house faces a steep drop-off that looks out over the city. There's homes on both sides of ours that are separated by a high brick wall. I was situated in a way that I was facing the house with my back to the drop-off and able to see the brick wall to our neighbor's house to my far right, about 50 feet away. Remember, this is now about 3:30 to 4 o'clock in the morning, so it's pitch dark. I remember looking over at the wall and seeing a dark figure appear. It was more of a black shadow than a person and it slid up over the wall and started crawling over to me. The moment the first figure started over the wall, it was followed by 3 others that looked exactly like it. I followed them with my eyes as they slid up and over the yard until they slipped into the water in front of me. Then darkness. Now static. I can't see anything but I can hear the static getting louder and louder. It's building up more and more until it morphs into the sound of the jacuzzi jets. I look up and the figures are gone. Now darkness again. The beings are back. I'm talking to them but I don't remember what about. Now the static is building up again until it morphs into the jets. I look back up and they're gone. Darkness swallows me again and the beings are back. Then suddenly I come back to and I'm in the house, standing in the downstairs living room dripping wet. I start walking to my bedroom and I notice the light is turned on. I didn't leave it turned on, I think to myself. I walk in and to my absolute horror my entire family is there. They're all staring at me with looks of disgust and surprise. My dad approaches me and in a demanding voice says, "What are you on?" I desperately try to answer nothing. But my mouth won't work. I finally get something close to nothing out and he answers back, "You were slurring your words so badly I can't even understand you. Now tell me what you're on." I scream back nothing. And turn to my bed. My mom is sitting on it and I lay down next to her. She places her hand underneath me to feel my heart and I hear her say, "His heart is about to beat out of his chest." I get scared and in my final words utter, "Moonflower, I took moonflower." They ask in confusion what moonflower is and I point to my TV. I raise my hand and yell moonflower. As I point at the pods on my TV. Then darkness. That was my last memory. Suddenly I wake up and my mom is holding me. I'm sitting on the couch in the office and I see a figure charging toward me. I start batting at it with my hands and screaming and my mom holds me down and says, "Alex, it's just a hallucination. Settle down." I come back to and look at my arm. There's a bandage over my veins near my elbow and a hospital ID tag around my wrist. I ask what's going on and my mom tells me I've been in the hospital for the last 24 hours. Apparently they rushed me to the hospital after I passed out on my bed and I went crazy when I got there. I was punching the nurses and swearing at everyone so they had to restrain me on my hospital bed. I started to seizure so they gave me this stuff that's supposed to knock you out, but it didn't work until they gave me 10x more than what's normally required. My entire family really was in my room because apparently at some point I walked into the room my sister was sleeping in and mumbled some gibberish, so she went to my parents and woke them up, which woke everyone else up and they all wanted to see what was going on. To this day I honestly think I was starting to cross over to the spirit world and I was looking at actual spirits. Maybe they were looking over me. If I had fallen into the pool I would have unquestionably drowned. If I had walked over the edge of the yard I would have fallen to my death. The fact I didn't kill myself that night is a total miracle. Moonflower, Jimson weed, or whatever, is a terrible weed. I will stay away from it like the plague. I literally had no control over my body once it kicked in. I could have murdered my entire family and I would never remember it. There isn't enough money in the world to make me try it again.